Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr,
business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr Business Consulting.
Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs and business owners maximize their potential, build rock-solid businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Paulo Coelho said, "There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, the fear of failure." Well, in today's episode, we're going to talk about overcoming the fear of failure, how the rules have changed in the modern world, living by choice, not by chance, and more. Life is not linear, and neither is progress and growth. Our guest went from high school dropout to a broke jazz pianist to building 8- and 9-figure companies from his kitchen table. There were plenty of lessons learned along the way. Well, fast forward to today, he's a 3-time Inc. 5000 CEO with over $100 million in sales. He's happily married and living his best life. He's a husband and father to 4, a keynote speaker, author of the recently released book, Unlock Your Potential, host of the top-rated podcast by the same name, and is regarded as one of the most inspirational voices in business and personal development. Please welcome the founder and chief visionary officer of ENTRE Institute and the man who's helping us harness the power we all have within to create our dream life in the modern world, Jeff Lerner. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. It is great to see you.
I'm so grateful to be here. And Jay, I'm just going to call it like it is. You know, I've done a lot of guest appearances on shows and whatnot, and that might have been the most polished, like packed with me like loving the way it sounds intro that I've ever had. Like, that was great.
Oh, you're so kind.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It is my pleasure. And as I mentioned before we were rolling the cameras here, I am so excited to have this conversation. Your story truly is not only inspirational, it's a remarkable one, and it's a great story about always focusing on getting back up when we fall back down. And we're going to talk a bit more about that story, but I wanted to kick it off first by asking you, Jeff, what would you say is your favorite trait about yourself?
Oh, man. Can I give 2 answers?
You can.
Sort of like option C, both of the above. I would say, first of all, it is, and you alluded to it, I think it's that ability to take a licking and keep on ticking, right? I just kind of don't stop. At least I haven't yet. And I don't intend to until, my maker decides the show's over. And then I think the second thing is, and there's some unpacking I can do here, to the extent it's valuable, but I'll just sum it up by saying at a pretty early age, I had my fill of worrying what other people think about me and needing to live to please or to prove or to impress people, what in psychology we would call an external locus of control. I sort of reclaimed my internal sense of control and life orientation I would say in 2 phases, once in my 20s, once in my early 30s. But for the last 10 years, I've been pretty whole from the standpoint of like, I don't really need anybody to approve of me but me. And that's a really nice way to live. And I know that because for, even longer, I didn't live that way and it sucked. So I'm glad to be on this side of it.
Love that. Well, two great traits, and I appreciate you sharing that. I am going to, I think it would be worthwhile to tug on the string a bit of the second one when it comes to trying to impress people and the fact that you've been able to move past that. And let's say that that's not quite as important today as maybe it was in the past. And
Right.
You mentioned that there were 2 time periods for you. One was in your 20s and one was in your 30s. So let's go back a bit. What happened in your 20s where you not only discovered that this was something that you were doing and that you cared about, but then you were able to overcome it. And then what happened in your 30s? Basically the same question. So take us back, if you will.
Yeah, so I've been really interested my whole life and very aware of concepts around identity and how we identify and define ourselves. And that originated from being a kid who struggled a lot with identity because I was bullied a lot, and I carried a genetic condition, obviously since I was born, and I was clued into it at an early age by my parents, and it kind of created this sense of detachment for me of like, well, I'm different from everybody. And so I spent a long time wrestling, even at some of my earliest memories were just trying to figure out literally how to fit in, how to belong to literally this species that I felt alien to, right? I didn't feel like I knew, not only did I not belong, I didn't even know how to belong or what that would entail. And so identity's always been a big concept for me. And so in high school, this is getting to the experience in my 20s. I dropped out of high school, as you alluded to, because I wanted to become a musician. I wanted to find a trade or a vocation, something I could do that would allow me to really generate my life on my own terms. And I remember having this perception of schooling as like, essentially it was job training, right? It was like early stage job training. Like you're going through this stage, then you're going to graduate to this next stage, and then you're going to graduate probably with a bunch of debt into the job stage. And I just kind of saw the whole thing as like, I want to opt out of that game. So I'm going to go on the road less traveled over here, where you kind of figure it out and you make it up as you go. There is no template for what life looks like when you don't go down the traditional path, right? And so for me, it was drop out of school, get some space, figure it out for myself, become a musician, which meant applying myself. And this was kind of my early experience of grit and discipline, is like, okay, if I'm going to go this road less traveled route, I'm going to have an exceptional level of skill, because the mainstream traditional path of life is essentially optimized around a promise or an implied value exchange of security for, call it, at risk of offending somebody, call it for being average. The traditional path says you can be average and be okay, like you won't die. The non-traditional path, which is let's say I want to be a performer, I want to be an artist, I want to be an athlete, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be something that isn't maybe what my guidance counselor would have prescribed. That has a totally different standard, like performance and competence standard. You pretty much have to be exceptional, or else there's almost no assurance of even being okay. Like if you're a bad entrepreneur, you go get a job. If you're a bad artist, you go get a job. If you're a bad athlete or a non-exceptional athlete, I mean, I have a family member who plays double A minor league baseball. He's probably one of the 10,000 best baseball players in the world. He makes $20,000 a year, right? Like you either have to be amazing or you might as well not even try, right? And so that was when I became a musician. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to be so good just to even be able to get a gig, just to even not be considered a joke or a laughing stock. And I hadn't started until I was 16 years old. Like when I made the decision to be a pro is basically when I made the decision to start. I didn't have 10 or 15 years of lessons from when I was a little kid, right? And it was purely a calculation of like, I want a life less ordinary where I call the shots and I chart the course. But to qualify for that, I have to achieve a really, really high level of skill. And so I spent basically the next 12 years, from about 16 to 28, obsessed with proving myself as a musician, obsessed with proving myself and disproving some other people that had told me, Jeff, come on, dude, you're 16, you're 17 years old. I mean, I was basically 17 years old, and I went to the faculty at the University of Houston piano department, where I'm from Houston, Texas. And I said, hey, I really want to be a professional musician. And they said, well, how long have you been playing? And I said, 6 months. And they said, play something for us. And I, played my equivalent of like chopsticks or whatever. And they're like, okay, you need to find something else to do. This is not possible. You've already gone through puberty, which means your hands have already matured and your musculature. Biomechanically, you're going to be like rigid and tight. You weren't doing it as a young kid. You're not pliable. You haven't wired your brain. Like your synapses aren't going to fire the way you need. They basically told me there's 0% chance you'll ever be a professional musician because you started too late. You missed your window. And I basically spent the next 12 years proving them wrong and becoming, in sequence, first just capable enough to get a gig, and then good enough to get into college on a piano scholarship, even though I had not finished high school, and then good enough to earn the first chair in the University of Houston Jazz Piano Performance Department, which meant that college was paid for as long as I wanted, as long as I did 3 rehearsals a week and 2 performances a semester. It's kind of like being an athlete, right? Like you get good enough at something and all of a sudden the rules all change, right? But then I had to break into the professional scene and there was a lot of bias. Like, this is the new guy. I hadn't gone to one of the performing arts high schools. I hadn't studied with one of the right, faculty members or teachers that was networked in the community. Now I had to prove myself professionally. And by my mid-20s, I was playing the best gigs. I was playing private parties that sometimes paid $300, $400, $500 an hour in the homes of billionaires. And, not all the gigs, but some of them were like the best gigs you could possibly get. And really it was 12 years defined by, I did prove a lot to myself. And frankly, I did prove a lot to other people, but eventually I got exhausted because proving yourself is a push. It's not a pull. I'd rather be drawn in the direction of my emotion and my passion and my potential than having to push myself through this constant exertion of willpower in an almost adversarial way of living.
So let's pause on that point, because that's an important one. But I want to go back for just a moment, because I'm curious purely from a mindset perspective, and if we can put yourself back in that place where you were told that, Jeff, come on, this is unrealistic, this is not possible at this point, right? At your age, you don't have the experience, you don't have the background, you haven't had years of training, it's impossible. And from that point, you use the next 12 years to prove to not only yourself, but everyone else that I am that person, I can do that. But when they mention that to you, when you're sitting there in that room and you're confronted with that conversation, did you immediately go to, I'm going to prove you wrong, you just wait and see? Or did you almost believe that and then had to convince yourself otherwise?
It's sort of both and neither, if you will. I'm not going to say like I was immediately overcome with this almost unreasonable level of confidence that's like, I will persevere, I will overcome, I will show you all. It wasn't that level of what would border on like delusional hubris. I mean, they were some of the best musicians in the country. Like they had a reasonable basis for what they were saying, and they know their trade. So there was a part of me that was like, maybe they're right, But also, I wasn't going to be dismayed or dissuaded or defeated. So in that sense, it was kind of like, I don't care what you say, I'll show you, or I'll show me. But within all that, or I would say in between those two sort of perspectives was where I was really at, which was just nothing could be worse than the traditional option. So I almost didn't really care if I succeeded or failed, because even failing would still be better than like, okay, I'll major in, I don't know, whatever people major in, something they're not passionate about. Like, I don't want to poo-poo any major. Like, I just want to be excited about my life, right? So to say like, okay, I'll just major in something just so I can get the degree and get the job and live on the bottom 3 rungs of Maslow's hierarchy, trying to not die as long as possible, that was the ultimate failure. And so any outcome different than those were preferable, or different than that was preferable.
Interesting. So let's go ahead and go back then to the point that you were making about spending 12 years or investing 12 years to prove to yourself and prove to others. That can be taxing, right? Mm-hmm. It can be exhausting when that is your focus. So continue to pull on that one, because I think that's an important point that we can all learn a very valuable lesson from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hot burning fuel, and it's great. You can get great propulsion out of an anti perspective. Like I'm anti my doubters. I'm anti my haters. I'm anti this world that's trying to control me. I'm in a constant state of resistance, right? Like that can be very powerful. You go watch, I think it was called The Dance with Michael Jordan, that the Chicago Bulls documentary, and you hear him for 12 episodes talking about how he would literally create adversaries just so that he would have someone to fight against, to prove himself against, right? And you can do that. But, I think about it in terms of fuel. That fuel burns hot and it puts off a pretty nasty exhaust. And, I also got divorced twice in those 12 years. I also alienated a lot of people in my life, and to some degree it was kind of like how you do one thing is how you do everything. I needed to be proving myself to everyone all the time. Even people that are like, Jeff, we like you. We want you to win. We're here for you. And I was like, no, you're part of it too. You're part of the conspiracy and you need to be wrong too. And some of it was, I didn't really like myself. So even somebody that really liked me, like I doubted their judgment, so to speak. And it just, eventually it did reach a point where it was like, I'm proving that I can accomplish a lot if I'm willing to sacrifice connection and I'm willing to be alone all the time. And at a certain point, I think we want more than to be alone and right. So I changed. I had to.
So let's talk about the change itself and the process behind that, because you've been very open about the growth that you've been through, your own personal development, overcoming failure. You talked about your 2 failed marriages and alienating people. What were you learning about yourself during this entire process? And then what was the catalyst, or maybe there were multiple events that finally just said, I have to do something different. I know I can be a better person. I can be a better human being. What was it for you? And walk us through maybe some of the steps that you took that we can all benefit from.
So I think that, again, I was sort of marked as different from a very early age. And bear in mind, as you alluded to, I've done a huge amount of therapy and introspection. Even when I'm not in a therapist's office per se, I sort of like walk around in this constant state of introspection and I'm really obsessed with finding like the first principles and the higher truths of existence that I don't think present through common experience, because I have a pretty deep belief that the human condition is this, sort of like don't shoot me for the reference, but Karl Marx called it like dialectical tension, where I'm not a Marxist or a socialist, to be clear, but in referencing Marx, he talked about dialectical tension, like how in nature there's these tension of opposing forces, right? And I believe that there's a tension between our individual human created purpose and our collective consciousness around human survival. That like a lot of what we do as a group or as a collective or as tribes to survive and perpetuate biologically is actually in direct opposition to what we were created to do individually, psychologically, and spiritually, right? And we can see that playing out in the world. Like most people are operating most of the time from a standpoint of survival and belonging and acceptance, and yet they're like existentially sad because they aren't actually aligned with our created purpose. But to be completely aligned with our created purpose, we actually have to abandon worry about death altogether. And so that's not a natural state. And I think that's the tension of human existence. We don't need to go deeper into that, but I'm just setting that up as a frame that for me, I've just always been trying to get to the freaking truth. Why am I here? And I never saw the answer to the whyness in needing to be accepted by others, or needing to get that job, to get that house in suburbia, to get those traditional accoutrements of success or acceptance. But the world was so programmed around those priorities that the only way I knew to get out from under them was to be in a constant fight. And I think that a lot of people, now I have the vantage point of running a platform where literally hundreds of thousands of people have come in the last 3.5 years. to say, I want a different path for my life. And the energy that you get from people, and I mean, I meet people at events and I talk to them and I get anecdotal feedback from our advisor team and our coaches. And like, I have thousands of data points to support what I'm saying here, which is that for a lot of people, the energy of I want to go my own way, or I want to be fulfilled, or I want to find my individual path feels oppositional. It feels like I have to fight my way out, right? And that's just natural. Like if I'm going to leave the tribe, I'm going to have to fight my way out, right? And I think that's just our default setting, right? And so for me, that was what I did for many years. And then I reached this point where, and again, in the benefit of hindsight from all the therapy is I had this program running in my mind that I discovered through a process called inner sentence work, where my inner sentence, my guiding true north orientation through my life from about the time I was 8 years old to about the time I was like in my around 30, 32, maybe, when I finally started to understand it well enough, and not just understand it, but actually unwind it, was being different is okay as long as it's being better. And so again, this sort of goes to this bias and this default setting that a lot of us have, where it's like, for me to accept my differences, I have to like triumph. It's almost like zero sum. Like I have to win at the expense of somebody else. That's the only way for it to be okay to be different. And so for me, it was like, I'll be okay as I'm a pianist, I'm a jazz pianist, but that's only okay if I'm the best. Or, you know, I got bullied a lot, or I've got a lot of identity issues around being like a fat kid or being overweight or being unhealthy, but that's okay. I can get fit, but I have to be like obsessively fit. I have to have like a six pack, and I have to be able to deadlift 3 times my body weight. And I have to have like all these sort of like almost arbitrary standards that were really, if I'm being honest, they were just about being good enough that maybe I could qualify to feel good about myself as a person. So, and anyway, and so eventually I realized I am exhausting myself to the point of like nihilism to try to keep living this way. And I've just got to find a way to be distinct and different and unique without having to be better or superior.
So I want to touch on the inner sentence work for a moment, because I think that's a transformative process.
Yeah.
I'm curious to find out from you, in your own experience, when you started that work, how long did it take you to discover that inner sentence? I mean, here you mentioned from the age of 8 until 32, you define what that sentence was. How long did that take you to discover? And when you did, what was that moment like for you?
So, I mean, I literally took a class called Inner Sentence class with a therapist. So in my early 30s, I mentioned around 32, right? And maybe 32, 33, somewhere in there. At 30 or 31, I met the woman that's now my wife and the mother of my 4 kids. And she was actually a single mom with 3 kids at the time. So 3 of my 4 kids are not biologically mine. I adopted them after I got married to her. And so very early in our relationship, we did this sort of analysis of our lives. And I had 2 failed marriages. She had, I call it 1.5 failed marriages, one formal and one informal. We were like, okay, we just want to do better, right? We don't want to go through that again. And so we made a preemptive strike on our own dysfunction, and we got into therapy basically from like the day we started dating, like within the first 6 months.
Wow.
And there's a whole backstory there that I'll spare you because it's long and I guess not terribly germane, but we got into therapy early and aggressively. And within a year, I signed up for a program that our therapist was running called Inner Sentence class. And it was I believe it was an 8-week course, once a week for 3 or 4 hours. I can't remember. So let's assume 32 hours. Let's assume it was 4 hours. So it's a 32-hour course. And I had to take it twice. The first time, I was peeling back the layers, but I never got to the core. So it took me about 64 hours of very intense work within a group of about 20 people that were focusing a lot of energy on that work for me to figure out what made me tick. And I do remember the moment there was an exercise up at the board when I got clear, and it said, I'll be okay as long as I'm better. That's how it was. I'll be okay, blank is kind of most people's inner sentence. Because as a kid, we're trying to solve for how to be okay, right? And for me, it was, I'll be okay as long as I'm better. And it's because I had so early been marked as different. The only way to make different not feel awful was to make it feel superior. And that's, so I had been operating under this like obsessive need to prove myself through performance since I was a little kid. And it's no wonder I felt like I was aging prematurely. I was just exhausted, right? And I was now in an environment with a new relationship and these three beautiful children, one of whom was 2 years old and had started calling me dad because I was the only male father figure she'd ever known, because her deadbeat, sperm donor bailed out as soon as he found out her mom was pregnant. And I suddenly had this love that I wanted to be able to engage in. And I was not unable to engage as long as I was so exhausted and so focused on performance, because that's not the type of energy that kids respond to. They just want somebody to connect with, not be lesser than, so to speak.
Well, so based on what you've been sharing so far, what is your opinion on labels that we use today, labels that we put on ourselves, labels that we put on our children?
I mean, I think labels are cool as long as we come up with, I think there's just shy of 8 billion people in this world. So if we could come up with just shy of 8 billion labels, I think they would fit. Like, I am Jeffrey Michael Lerner the first, who is a Pisces, who is, 176 pounds and 6 feet tall and all this. I mean, and that's just the physical stuff, like, and has, debilitating insecurities, but has worked really hard to overcome them and got bullied in school. Like, there's a whole, so I guess I'm being cheeky and answering your question by rejecting the question. No, labels are pretty dumb.
Okay. Well, when I hear your story and what you experienced in your youth, and I will share that just some of the data points, obviously we're different people. We've had a different life experience. I'm a few years older than you are, but nonetheless, I'm also was a professional musician, went to college to be a professional musician, and suffered with a lot of debilitating self-esteem issues when I was young, not feeling that I was worthy enough to do many, many things, called all types of names, had labels put on me.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself, and I've been doing a lot of deep work over the past several years, but I've discovered through that work some of those things that had occurred in my youth that really did hold me back tremendously in a number of ways. And I still work on those things, right? Because as we discover more, we don't know what we don't know, but once we start to unpack that and peel back the layers, we start to see more. But I think the key, which is the beautiful thing about everything that you've been sharing up to this point, is the self-awareness component, and then doing something about it. So not feeling shame about therapy, not feeling shame about recognizing the fact that there are areas that I need to work on for myself in order for me to show up and become the best person that I can be and also live the best life that I can. And, it's funny, Jeff, I always say to any of the businesses that I work with, if you want to build a successful, thriving business, you have to build yourself first.
Yeah.
And everything that we've been talking about so far really points back to that. So I really do appreciate, and I'm grateful for you sharing part of your story here. So we did talk about this a bit, but I am curious to find out from you, what is something specific that you believed about yourself in your youth that you later discovered was not true? Something very specific.
Yes, I will absolutely answer that question with specificity. But first, let me just sort of echo and emphasize what you were pointing out there about, call it the transparency or the vulnerability around therapy and our screwed upness, right? Because what I have found through hundreds of conversations like this, both on my own show and going on other shows and talking to successful entrepreneurs, and a lot of this is very entrepreneurial, is that it's exactly what you said. Your success is directly, like, far more than most people probably intuitively assume, and it's kind of hard to even believe until you experience it for yourself, that your success is directly tied to your willingness to get in the deep end of your own life and deal with your stuff, right? And I mean, most of the really high performance entrepreneurs and achievers in general, and coaches and facilitators, guys like I'll use an example of like Todd Herman, who coaches Olympic athletes and people like that. Like, it's all the same stuff. It's like dealing with your damaged goods and learning to leave your baggage and move forward without it. I mean, that's, if somebody's listening to your show, like, I don't care about all this mumbo jumbo, like, just tell me how to make $1 million. We're telling you how to make $1 million. Like, I just want to state that for the record. So in terms of something specific that I believed that I no longer believe, it's sort of what we've been talking about. It's that people would want to connect. People would want to have a relationship with me, platonic or otherwise, if they admired my abilities. I believe that for a long time. The way to earn people's respect and interest and even be a desirable person for others to connect with was to impress them with my abilities at something that was perceived as difficult. And that's why, I mean, for a decade, it was piano. Piano is a difficult instrument. And I was obsessed with being a virtuoso at it. And I was obsessed with being a virtuoso at it, despite having not started until I was 16 years old. I mean, if I'm being fully honest and laying my ego bare, I had this belief in my life that if I was one of the best jazz pianists in the world, and it was known that I hadn't started until I was 16 years old, I would be enough of a unicorn that people might actually want to, like, be in my world. I mean, talk about a recipe for exhaustion.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And now I've accepted that honestly, what makes a person, call it desirable in terms of people wanting to have any kind of relationship or association with you, is just how it feels to be around you. Do you feel like love? Do you feel like acceptance? Do you feel like empathy? And by the way, it's not a transactional manipulation. Like, I will learn to feel like love so that other people will give me what I want. It's just like, that's actually how we're wired. It feels better that way, to just be open and unassuming and loving and strive. It doesn't mean we stop striving for excellence, but we're doing it because excellence is an intrinsic expression of our sublime nature as created human beings, not because we need to be better than anyone else or prove ourselves to anyone else. Comparison is the thief of happiness, but that doesn't mean that we don't still strive to be excellent.
So true, and so well articulated. And as I'm listening and I'm hearing some of what you're pointing out, it ties very well to many of the core values that you have at ENTRE Institute, which I want to talk about that as well here in just a moment or two. So I appreciate you sharing that. I would love it if we could jump into your latest book, Unlock Your Potential. And first, thank you so much for bringing this book to life and also sharing this book with me. And obviously, we're going to provide a link to be able to share this with all of our listeners as well. And I can share with you, Jeff, and I'm sure it's not unlike you. You are well-read, you're well-spoken, you're educated. I read a lot of books, and this, I have so much enjoyed reading this book. It truly, not only is there a lot of research in it, but you tell your story, obviously, but you go into so much depth, and you really do provide, which is the outstanding piece of this, you provide the toolbox, if you will, and the framework where we really can create our own dream life in a modern world, as long as we not only read, but apply the lessons learned. And I will always say, for everyone that's watching and listening right now, the key to all of this is doing the work. Reading a book is fantastic. Having knowledge is fantastic. But until you do something with it, that's where the magic happens. And so, Jeff, I just want to acknowledge you first and foremost. So I would love it if we could start with the dedication that you make in this book right at the very beginning. And you dedicate the book to your parents, Ron and Jane, as well as to your wife, Jacqueline, and your 4 children. And just as I was doing some research, I came upon an article. I realized that your mother passed a couple of years ago now. Seemed like a remarkable woman. Share with us a bit about your parents, and what have been some of the key insights that you've learned from your parents that you carry forward in life?
Thanks for the question. Done a lot of interviews. Nobody's ever asked that question. Nobody's ever done that research. I really appreciate that. And yeah, sorry, I get kind of emotional. Like you mentioned, my mom passed a couple years ago. Actually, in November, it'll be 2 years in a few weeks. Or no, I guess in about a month. And so, yeah, my mom was an extraordinary lady. She really was. I don't know what you stumbled upon, but yeah, there's been some stuff published lately. The Yellowstone Park Foundation, where she was really active in her retirement, actually has a project called the Jane Lerner Legacy Project, where they're doing a number of improvements to Yellowstone Park in her honor. She gave about 10 years of her life after her work career to advocacy in Yellowstone Park. They moved to Montana and fell in love with nature and up there and wanted to get involved and help. But yeah, I mean, I grew up with, it's funny, my mom represented this exact duality that I'm describing, because she was an incredibly intelligent and high achieving person that was so well loved for reasons that I did not at all understand until I had these breakthroughs for myself. I thought the reason my mom was such a well-loved and well-liked person was because she was so accomplished and impressive. She was first in her class at law school. She literally, she took the state of Texas bar exam in 1979 and set the highest score in Texas history that's still never been beat 43 years later, while she was pregnant with me, mind you. She studied for the bar and set that record. I mean, she was just an extraordinary woman. She was I think the second female partner at the 4th biggest law firm in the country. She just did all this amazing stuff. She was on the board of Houston Grand Opera. She was really active in the community in Houston. And I just thought, well, of course they love her. She's successful and she's brilliant. But then as I started to get older and I started to hear the way my people talked about my mom, nobody was talking about how smart she was. They were talking about how loving she was. They were talking about how empathetic she was. They were talking about how she was the one, the most reliable person they knew. They could always go to her. In fact, she chose her specialization as an attorney. She did estate planning, and she got involved in very high-end, complex, large estates for very affluent families. And the reason, she told me later in life, the reason that she did that is she saw numerous examples around her as a successful, as a person moving in successful circles, of situations where somebody would die with a large estate and siblings would turn on each other. All the fangs would come out, and just the nastiness and the underbelly of humanity would be brought out to the surface by essentially an inherited pot of wealth that needed to be distributed. And then that scenario, she felt, was a situation that she could bring sanity and peace to, first of all, with intelligent pre-planning, and then extremely loving and benevolent execution, or whatever it's called, to be the executor of an estate. And so she was known for let's say there was some cranky billionaire oil patriarch who, drilled for oil and had a $500 million net worth. And they would give her that estate to plan. in part because they knew she would plan the heck out of it, but especially because she knew that when that person passed and it came time to divvy it up, she had such a way with people, she would keep them from turning on each other as she executed whatever the deceased person's wishes were. And that she basically took on that area of law because it was the most humane thing she could do with her expertise. Like, and I just started to see my mom through a completely different light. Sadly, after she had retired and moved away and I didn't have as much close contact with her, I really came to understand her. And I came to understand her, frankly, as a part of myself. And that through that same process that I just described about my own awakening and my own transformation, that was how I sort of rediscovered my mom and finally understand who she really was.
Did you have an opportunity to express that to her before her passing about this new understanding, if you will, as you went through your own self-discovery process?
Sadly, not with as fine a point as I would have liked. I definitely got to change and evolve my relationship with her so that it reflected more of this mutual understanding, or call it, I guess, one way understanding me of her. And I think she got to feel that I had shifted, but we never got fully to the point of catharsis of saying, hey, this is the new us. And I will regret. That's one of the very few things that I'll acknowledge as a real regret that I can do nothing about for now.
Understood. And tell me about your father. So what were some of the key insights, some things that you learned from your father that you carry forward today?
First of all, I'd say there's three that immediately come to mind. One is the importance of marrying up. Marry somebody that will love you, will put up with you, and will challenge you to make you and hold a standard for you to get better every day. And I've definitely, third time's the charm. I definitely did that this time around. But the other two things I think are, so my dad, he was actually struggled with dyslexia as a child, and he had some challenges, and he did get his undergraduate, but he was never able to finish his MBA, but he still had a very successful career in money management because he developed. And again, it took me a long time to really see this, even just in the last few years, as I've kind of reached some different levels of entrepreneurship and myself and realized that like client-centric focus, that the client or the customer is ultimately the variable, the key to your success, right? How well you take care of people. It kind of goes to what we said. People want to be in relationship with you based on how they feel when they're around you. People want to be your customer based on how they feel when they're in business with you, right? And my dad became a very, very successful money manager for very, very high net worth people because he was artful at making them. And I shouldn't use the term making them because that sounds like a manipulation. He was very artful at giving them good reason to trust him and feel safe with him and feel like he really cared and had their best interest in his role as a fiduciary, because he really did. He was obsessed with taking great care of his clients. And that allowed him to work his way up from, kind of run-of-the-mill retail stockbroker to managing over $1 billion in assets in his career for extraordinary. I mean, some people that, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were some of his clients for private wealth management because he just made them feel so cared for. So that's part of it, is really how to create an experience of caring for people. And then the other is just the power of consistency. And this I would credit to both my parents is, not one day of my entire life did I ever not see my parents be up and at it by 6 a.m. Weekends, weekday, snow day. Well, we lived in Houston. There weren't a lot of snow days. But I mean, even if it was a day off, they just didn't take a day off from their cadence of having high standards and operating at a high level. And I saw like they didn't hit a jackpot. They just hit singles and doubles consistently for 10 years before I was born and 20 years after I was born. And I just got to see them slowly climb the ladder of success through consistent excellence. And I think that one of the strengths that I have is I think I play the long game. I see long term. I mean, this sounds people might hear this and say, oh, well, you have some money, so you have the luxury to think this way. But even when I was broke, I wasn't really worried about next week. I was worried about like 10 years from now. And I don't think that's changed. Now, if anything, I'm probably thinking in like 20-year intervals. I'm 43, and most of my goals right now are oriented around where I want to be when I'm 60 years old. And I try not to put too many goals in between here and now, because it changes the game. You can't look at the horizon and look at your feet. You're either thinking short term or long term, and I'd rather just think long term. And that's why I'm so obsessed with first principles and deeper truths, is I think they're the only things that can point you, that can steer you right over the longest stretches of time. And you only have to solve for them once you get clear, and then you can hold to them for decades.
So much value in what you've shared in the past several minutes, obviously throughout this conversation. But for all of you that are watching and listening right now, I'm going to ask you to hit pause on this podcast, hit the rewind button, get your notepad out, replay, and make sure that you are taking notes, taking very clear notes, because there's so much that Jeff has shared here that can make a significant difference in your life, in the lives of those around you, if you're willing to, again, do the work, right? Put in the reps, have your plan, but listen to what Jeff has been sharing here, because there is so much wisdom in these words. I want to make sure that you're not missing any of this. So do make sure that you're taking good notes, and let's go ahead and continue the conversation. So we're jumping into Unlock Your Potential. Also, Jeff, in your dedication, you dedicate the book to your wife and your 4 children as well. If you had to, and I know this is difficult, but if you had to summarize the way that your heart and head feel about Jacqueline, what would you say in a sentence or two?
I would say it is an unquantifiably large amount of gratitude. It's an infinity of gratitude, because she gave me the gift that prior to meeting her, I had struggled to give myself. And basically what that means is she embodied love in a way that was so strong that it overcame my resistance to being loved and eventually to loving myself. Like, she's just, and I mean, that sounds like this kind of grandiose statement, but I mean, anybody that knows my wife would be like, yep, that's Jacqueline. Like, she's a lot like Jeff's mom. Like, if somebody knew the both of them, they'd be like, yes, Jeff had 2 of the most loving women on planet Earth in his life. And she loved me so much that it taught me to love myself. And it was coupled, the fact that it was coupled with therapy, where I had the energy of love embodied from her, and then I was taught the tactics of self-love through cognitive restructuring to get a lot of my bad wiring and my negative self-talk out of the way. But I honestly think I could have probably done all the therapy that I did, but without having that model and that sensation of loving energy with her, I don't think it would have had the same result.
Beautiful. And again, for all of you that want to learn more about Jeff and Jacqueline, I would encourage you to check out Jeff's podcast, Unlock Your Potential, which we'll link to as well. They did a great episode that I listened to. They may have done more than one, but there was an episode that I listened to about marriage, about the challenges that they've faced, about going through therapy, about all of the deep work that they've done together. And it really is an interesting piece. So make a point to listen to that as well, because I truly believe that you will get some learnings out of that episode, not only about marriage, but relationships in general. That's the key here, right? Is learning about relationships. So excellent. So there's a couple things that I'd really love to talk about here. And I know that we have a short time today, so we're only going to be able to scratch the surface. But first, I would love it if you would be able to give us some highlights on how the rules have changed in a modern world. You spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's important for us to highlight and really point out some of those key areas that have changed to bring those to the forefront.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I want to punctuate your last point about relationships and say that, when I was going through that therapy and I was working on my marriage, I thought I went to therapy to learn to be a better husband and a father. I had no idea that it was actually the key that would unlock my potential as an entrepreneur. Building teams, creating clarity around mission and vision and alignment of values with teams, creating an energy in a workplace that people actually like the way it feels and they want to come to work and they want to do their best work. I mean, I literally would credit, aside from a happy marriage and a nice family life, I would literally credit about $150 million in revenue to potential that was unlocked in therapy and this kind of work. So I want to put that point on it for your audience. This is a business show, right? And I think people need to understand the quantitative and qualitative value of this kind of work, depending on their goals. It's the one size fits all formula for everything is like, become a more pure embodiment of loving, empathetic energy and become a better communicator therefrom. And like everything improves. So anyway, to answer your question about how the rules have changed, I think there's a couple things. One, in the book opens with a pretty strong statement about how the American dream is dead in the sense of what people think that means, right? Like the work hard, go to college, get a house with a 2-car garage, go into student debt, get a mortgage, go into 30-year mortgage and work toward this, pot of gold at 65 years old where it all pays off and you get to magically live this retirement. It's like, and it's just a math problem. It's like if we were going around telling kids like, do this, do this, do this, do this, here's the 50-year plan for your life because 1 + 1 = 3. At some point, somebody would need to go, well, wait, but 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3. So if that's your reasoning for all that you're recommending people do, maybe we should call it into question, right? And the reality is the math of the American dream doesn't hold up anymore. And so that's like a really hard pill for some people to swallow. In fact, the only negative reviews I've gotten, I think the 2% of reviews on my book that are not positive, it's either because I take some shots at the education system or because I fundamentally question the solvency of the American dream in its traditional conception, right? And people are just offended by that, sort of dogmatically. But so that's one way the rules have changed is that the entire basis for a lot of the rules that we inherit and that we sort of operate on, I think has been called into question. And we're seeing it's fun. It's not funny. It's tragic. But even since the book was published, or at least since the book was written, books get written a year or two before they're published, right? Since I finished writing the book, a lot of what we're seeing play out in the world today with inflation, with monetary policy, with stuff going on in the economy, stuff going on in society, we don't have to, like you said, we can only scratch the surface, but like it's validating what I said in the book. Like this was all foreseeable based on things that were set in motion about 100 years ago in our economic system. And we don't need to get into like Keynesian monetary policy or whatnot, but if you're interested, you should. Keynes, look it up, Keynesian. And you'll understand why we're having inflation right now and why the government keeps trying to kick the can down the road and minimize short-term pain for people by compounding and agitating long-term problems. And at some point we're going to have to pay the piper and it's just going to be worse when we do. Right. But the reason that's important isn't because everybody's an economist and everybody needs to go write a doctoral thesis about it, but it's because it's the reason why you can't retire and probably won't be able to if you have a traditional job. The average raise in this country is 2.8% a year. Well, when inflation is real inflation is 12%, what that basically means is congratulations, you only lost 9% of your buying power this year because of that raise you got, right? Like this has real impact on real people. And I think so that's part of what's changed. And I think sort of the final way to bring all that into one strategic statement of like, okay, well, that all sucks. What should I do about it? Is that I think that entrepreneurship, or what I call entrepreneurialism, which is a sort of a more philosophical way of being, not just like starting a business per se. But entrepreneurialism is actually the new job security. It's the new life security. It's the new way of being in the world, where you're not investing in a system. You're not investing in an employer. You're not investing in traditional notions of security. You're investing in yourself, and you're investing in developing a base of skills that give you a risk tolerance greater than what society says is reasonable, because that's actually the only way to not only get ahead, but just not be getting further and further behind as time passes. You have to have a higher than average risk tolerance. You have to have a much higher than average skill set. And you have to have a very different long-term orientation and perspective in this world. And you have to basically break up with superficial materialism and kind of the commercial ethos of the world today, or else not only are you like less likely to be happy and fulfilled, you're basically screwed. And there's a chapter in the book that says, get rich or you're screwed, that is essentially, expounding on what I'm saying. And I encourage people to read the book, not because I need more book sales. Honestly, selling books is a terrible way to make money. I don't even know what my deal is. I don't know if I make money when people buy a book or not, but because other people need to make money. That's why they should read the book. And I just think that most people and again, I have a platform where 272,000 people have signed up in less than the last 4 years because of the truth of what I'm saying, which is the traditional path is just not working for people anymore. And the book will explain to you why that is.
So I can just share with you from personal experience, and you've talked to many, many others, and you've also studied many others who followed that traditional path. I certainly did. I believe that when I got into my corporate life, that was it, right? I mean, I was set for life and things were going to work out well. I was going to retire with the gold watch and life was going to be fantastic. And I realized not soon enough, although, right, just like the analogy of the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is today. Once you realize it, act on it, right? Do whatever is necessary to get out of that chasm. And you do such a great job of providing the details here. And I will share with everyone that it is absolutely worth so much more than the cost of the book in the knowledge and education that you're going to gain from this. And there are going to be areas of this book that are going to smack you in the face. Be prepared for that, but also be open, right? Be open to changing your existing belief structure, because so much of that is tied to what we were told. So much of it is tied to our biases and how we were raised and so many other variables. And it is important to consume the right kind of information, test it, right? Do your own research, but absolutely read a copy of this book. So I appreciate you sharing that. And again, you do go into a tremendous amount of detail. I would love to be able to go deeper on that one area, but we'll have to do that another time. But I did want you definitely to share with our audience the piece about living by choice and not by chance. And in this particular section is really a lot of the heart and soul of the book, where you talk about the 3 Ps. Actually, there's 4 Ps, quite frankly, right? But the 3 Ps, and how that has been so incredibly transformative in not only your life, right, but all of those who are current clients of ENTRE Institute.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So I mean, gosh, if I'm gonna sort of state the core framework, call it the source code of the operating system that I use to live my life, and that now thousands of other people have installed into their lives, and that I get consistently great feedback on. And it's really simple. So I'll start with a brief quote by Mark Twain, who said, "The 2 most important days in a man's life are the day they're born and the day they figure out why." And that second day alludes to my deep belief that there is some purpose for which we were all created. We are all teleological beings. Like, and if somebody doesn't know what teleology means, it means you can look at something and see its function within its form. Like if you look at a fork, you go, okay, this is meant to be held and it's meant to stab things. It's in the design of the fork, right? I think you can look at a human being. We can look at ourselves, and our function is within our form. We can look at our life and we can decode the breadcrumbs and see, and eventually with enough work and enough time and enough energy, enough focus, go, why I can get clear on why I'm here if I'm just willing to look hard enough at myself, right? And so assuming that somebody agrees with me that there is a point to all this, because by the way, not to get dark and weird, but Camus said the only serious philosophical question is suicide. Like either there's a point or there isn't. And if you're like, well, there's no point, then why bother? And if there is a point, then how could you not want to figure it out, right? And so assuming you're with me that there's a point and we shouldn't all just, disappear tomorrow, then getting clear on what the point is has got to be the aim of life. And so you allude to the 4 Ps. The 3 Ps are physical, personal, and professional growth, the first 3 Ps. And I believe that you can wipe everything else out of your life that is not oriented towards physical, personal, and professional growth and say, all right, I'm given a discrete amount of time and energy with which to live. Let me be developing myself physically, personally, and professionally, if only so that I can be consistent enough and progressive enough and filling my toolkit with enough skills and enough resources and enough relationships so that, and enough clarity and enough consistency and enough sort of like minimization of chaos and distraction that I can be both clear and prepared for when my purpose emerges. And purpose is the 4th P. So the idea of life is simply live the first 3 Ps, physical, personal, and professional growth, to create the clearing and the preparedness, and be willing to do the self-analysis to get clear on the 4th P, which is purpose, and then continue to live the first 3 Ps, physical, personal, and professional, so that you can be continuing to level up and be more and more prepared as your purpose gets more clear. And that becomes the total orientation of your life. And the nice thing about entrepreneurship is that it gives you a way to do all of that and make a living and not have to artificially, bifurcate your life between the time that I spend trading time for money and the time that I spend developing myself and getting clear on my purpose. With entrepreneurship, it can all become the same thing. And that's the philosophy.
So good. And again, friends, we're going to link to this book. You're going to get so much more detail on all of these areas and much, much more. Also, where can we go to learn more about ENTRE Institute? If we had listeners that are interested in kicking the tires, learning more about what you offer through this educational institute and program, where can we go?
I appreciate the question. Honestly, I would invite people just to come check me out, right? You mentioned the book. I think it's $28. I like to ask for very little and give very much, and hopefully win somebody's heart and reciprocity for them to go, oh, I like this guy. He gives a lot, and maybe I'll seek more, right? So I would say the book is a great place to start. My YouTube channel, which is Jeff Lerner Official. I have about 900 free training videos on my YouTube channel that I produced over the last 4 years. Because I find that, the more you give, the more you get. And so, go there and you'll get more Jeff Lerner than you probably ever wanted in your life, but maybe something will strike a chord. And if so, every video has a link to ENTRE and how to learn more and do more. So I'll start there.
We will link to all of that. 2 quick things for you, Jeff. Number 1, what challenge would you encourage our audience to take?
Create surplus every day. And that starts with finances. I mean, literally, like, get yourself a piggy bank and save a penny every day just to start retraining yourself to live below your means. And then I would suggest creating additional surplus physically and personally. In other words, push yourself to be more physically capable than you would ever need to be based on your daily life, right? Like, I don't need to be able to run a triathlon, but the ability to do so in the not needing to do so is surplus. I have excess credit that I can draw on if I need to. Ditto for our personal life. Be over investing in relationships. Be over depositing in the love bank of the most important relationships in your life, so that in physical, personal, and professional areas of our life, there's always credit there if and when we need to draw on it.
So good. Thank you so much for sharing that challenge with us. And Jeff, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I truly am grateful for you. This was such a great conversation, and you shared so many amazing, powerful insights. I appreciate you, and thank you.
No, this has been wonderful. And I just got to acknowledge the thoughtful and well-researched questions and leading of the conversation. Jay, you're a hell of a host, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for all of you, thank you so much for watching and listening. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, leave us a comment about this episode? We would love it if you would share one or two key takeaways from this specific episode with Jeff. And also, to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com/podcast. And until next time, keep learning and growing. Make sure you pick up a copy of Unlock Your Potential, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Business Consultant. Jay Scherr Business Consulting.